and try to persuade them otherwise. For now, I kind of wanted to outline the topics that we'll be speaking of today. We're going to start off really general, and then we're going to get a little more specific about blockchain governance on a singular level, and I'll explain what that means when we get there. And then we'll go broader on blockchain governance as an interchain as a whole, and we'll finish off with some questions that hopefully will challenge you and challenge myself as well. As always, I'm always learning, and I appreciate any pushback because that's the way I'll learn. So, with that said, we're going to start off with the what, why, and how of blockchain governance. I think this is a very good place to begin our conversation. The first question that we kind of have today that we can talk about is, what is the form of governance that blockchains and Cosmos take on, in your opinion? Could be aristocracy, democracy, so on. Would love to hear
it. It's neither of those, in my opinion. I believe that Cosmos chains most resemble the form of a classical corporation there's like one caveat, okay? And this caveat is interesting and really important. Until we get off our butts, and this includes myself, I have a half-finished issue or PR on the SDK. By the way, if you want to finish it, you can. It needs a CLI component. Anyway, I have a Constitution piece of code that just, all this piece of code does is it adds some context to the first block of a new chain that isn't code, it's text. And this text has a specific purpose. It's for the people who use the chain and run the chain and build the chain. And the goal is to set expectations for basically like the different groups of stakeholders. So
let's focus there. I think what there are two things that we can touch on that are important that you spoke of. First of all, that you don't believe that, or you think that Cosmos blockchains take on a form of corporate governance rather than systematic governance that we speak of, in national topologies.
I think there's a difference, and this is actually, quite frankly, this is what gets me so engaged. If you look at a classical corporation, in my opinion, critical distinction from a modern startup, and this is indeed very important, is that they were created to pay dividends. I hate the modern startup form. And I've built them, by the way, and I'm lucky enough to be able to say, I built one and exited it and still own a piece. And you know what? I still hate the format. And I'll walk you through kind of a couple of the reasons why my feelings there are so strong. Okay. So, hey, I have exited a startup. What I mean is I no longer work there. I own shares. Okay. And it's growing. It's a Bitcoin mining company, headquartered in Buffalo, New York, but growing all over the US. And called Drone Energy, by the way. We patented a demand response system that generators use to basically, like, the Bitcoin mine becomes their consistent customer. When grid prices increase, they can just sell to the grid. Really, really interesting use of the flat nature of Bitcoin mining. But here's my point. All right, and this is by no fault of anyone's, mind you, can only estimate the value of my holdings. The org, in order for anybody to have, very significant equity, liquidity, where buyers are not guessing at prices, then it needs to go public, because only on a public market can you answer, in real time, complicated and hairy pricing questions. That makes sense to you?
It does. It does. But I would push back. I think I do disagree that at least that Cosmos governance or blockchains and Cosmos are forms of systematic governance rather than corporate governance. And here's the reason why.
When you say systematic, you mean like
I mean, like the
what?
United States governmental system or the Canadian. Like,
It's
I
just not a
mean,
nation state then. But here's the thing. I believe you're likely right, and that we end up at a blend. I don't think it's one or the other. So please continue. Sorry.
okay, yeah, I think a blend is probably fair. The reason I do believe that it's corporate governance is, or not corporate governance, excuse me, systematic governance, um, is it comes from the question of like, why do they exist in the first place? Why do these social contracts even happen on the internet or in reality? And we could talk about social contract theory, and where John Locke and Thomas Hobbes. John Locke speaks that the government is used to ensure the stable, comfortable lives of people and legal rights to liberty and property, and that people should forego the state of nature and give away some of their freedoms to protect public good. And if governments to
Um,
this end kind of like kind
I'm
of
going to interrupt
breach
if you don't
this, please go ahead.
mind. Okay. So, but you see, when you start a startup, you're doing exactly the same thing. You're dedicating an insane amount of your time and a ludicrous amount of career risk. Like, I look back on, uh, decisions like, uh, oh, even starting drone energy or just all this blockchain stuff. But not only all the blockchain stuff, anything I've ever done with a startup is ridiculously risky. So you just mentioned where you're giving something up for the common good. And by the way, I'm not sure that is what national, like, when you're saying systematic, I would replace that with like the state. And I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Murray Rothbard, but he's probably the governance philosopher that I find myself most closely aligned with.
Tell me more about him.
Murray Rothbard. Okay, so I would say that his best piece of work is this book called Anatomy of the State. Right, and what he lays out is, it can probably be summarized in a single sentence. And by the way, the book's only 50 pages long. The sentence is, the state is the monopoly on violence.
So where do we take that?
Well, first of all, this is why I honestly lean more toward the corporate vision for Cosmos. But also, there's that just, these chains are definitely, like, we have social goals, and really, they're quite lofty. Like, having conversations with this guy, Better Future, since Adam 2.0 kicked off, and his research he's in, I guess, hybrid academics. So he practices business and he also teaches business. And his kind of take is that with these neutral systems, we have a genuine opportunity to actually have rules. In governance today, I would argue that there aren't rules. Um, I would argue that laws are, at best, suggestions, which are enforced very differently on different groups of people, and that is known and intentional.
Let's
Um,
drill down into that a little more because I'm very curious. I think we're kind of commenting on the corporate structure of Cosmos blockchains and how they enforce the rules and mechanisms of the chain. So,
I'm kind of like into like you want to if you want to expand on that more. It's sort of like um, first of all, like maybe you can have a state that's fair because you know, in my experience, unless there's a horrific bug, a smart contract or chain, they'll do not like kind of sort of what it's told, which is what people do at best, right? A contract on a chain or a chain's logic itself is going to do exactly what it's built to do, bit for bit, with frightening accuracy. And, you know, you maybe heard that emphasis in my voice. Um, it's my belief that these systems do not exist today. Um, or haven't existed, to be very direct with you, until like the launch of the Cosmos Hub. And maybe even more so, we look to like pre-launch of the hub. It's kind of like Sunny's work on the governance module. While look, the governance module is imperfect in a bazillion ways. I can go on and on about that, but I don't want to. I would say instead that we ended up with this global. When I say global, I don't mean all around the world. I mean global to itself, right? So anybody can take Cosmos SDK, they can spin up a chain. Everybody holding tokens on that chain follows exactly the same rules. It's actually fair. And like
let's pause there because I think
okay.
that's really fascinating. That you're commenting on the mechanical um, strength and consistency of the ledgers. And so, kind of I wrote a paper a little while back that talked about how there are two methods of self-determination on chain, and one is governmental, and the other is mechanical. And while mechanically in Cosmos, we everyone functions on the same rules, and it's very fair. The way to self-govern and self-determine um, in regards to the social determination um, is less fair. Do you agree?
Um, well, yeah. I mean, in well, wait. I would like you to repeat that before I agree.
Okay, so I was saying that you're commenting on the mechanical methods that chains utilize to enforce rules. The rules that are enforced are equitably distributed across all of those participating parties within the chain. That being said, the mechanical way that we self-determine on chain is very fair versus the governmental way or the social way we self-determine is very unfair.
Well, I would say that when we like voting, you know, voting in the United States, I'm not sure it really works, but not for the reasons you might think. I'm not, you know, like maybe Trump did win, maybe Biden did win. I don't care. Okay, that's not why voting doesn't work. Voting doesn't work because we have endless laws and a total lack of clarity on what the law is. We have so much law that, you know, if you or I wished to, we could spend our whole lives reading, studying, and practicing law, and we would not understand all relevant law. And one of the arguments that I want to make, and I want to make like really pretty stridently to you, right, is like that is fucked, and I believe that is why I'm concerned about the trajectory of the United States. And man, like, look, you're 22, I'm 39, and I've done a whole bunch of different stuff. And should you ever start a business, okay, you will find it nightmarishly. When I say a business, I mean like a corporation registered in the United States, legal entity, all that stuff, right? You're going to find it nightmarishly more difficult than launching a blockchain. I really mean that. Not only that.
Why is that?
Was it?
Why is that?
It is because of the myriad number of laws and regulations. You can have your corporation with ease, really. But
is it because smart contracts and the rules that validators agree to provide clarity on the law of the chain, and everyone has to subscribe to that under them?
Yes, and there is far less laws.
Then my follow-up subsequent question to that is, why do we need blockchain governance if we have such clarity on a mechanical level? Why even have something that allows us to socially determine our future?
It's because of the failure of the state writ large. Because our meat-based governance doesn't work. It's not responsive to people's needs. And I would like to take this a step further. You know how I said that Cosmos was like corporate governance? Well, I'm sure you're aware that there is a contingent in the ecosystem. And by the way, these people are probably right some of the time, but I don't believe entirely so, okay? These people believe that it would be better if we moved toward a system where there's one person and one vote. And I want to tell you that I disagree with them. The reason is that unlike in, like Meet Jacob, right? Meet Jacob can choose from presently I'm merely an American citizen. But if I wanted to work hard at it, I could become a citizen of one of, a couple hundred other countries, right? And they would claim some level of exclusivity to that which is Jacob. But in blockchain world, you can concurrently be involved in a number of different chains, in a number of different roles, and have your vote weight as measured by stake, okay, differ between all of those. And this is where we kind of start to part ways with money. What I mean by that is that did you happen to see my rap video, sir?
No, I haven't, but I will be looking at it.
All right, I didn't make the rap video. Someone else made it. It was kind of my words, and they were rapped, and it was really, really cool and flattering. Okay. And in there, what I was, kind of opining on, wait, these layer one tokens, they aren't money, and I firmly believe this. So your Juno, your Atom, your Osmo, your whatever, okay, those are not money because they do so much more than money. I think that their most important function is actually like it's your level of influence in governance, and it's well, we have staking, right? It's your commitment to securing the mutual work. And if you'd like, I know I've been talking for kind of a long spell here, but I'll go full circle for you. Okay. Let me tell you about the earliest corporations. Okay. They were a little bit evil, mind you. Okay. But I believe that their governance structure was sound. Okay. It just began in the Netherlands, well, at least the formal sense. I imagine people did other similar stuff previously. But in the Netherlands, people invented this joint stock corporation. Okay. Stock, referring to the capital, the assets, the company, joint, everybody's all together. Okay. And so basically, here comes the evil. Okay. So, hi, I'm a Dutch ship captain, right? Now, I want to go kidnap some Africans and sell them in America. I'd say it's the most evil thing that the earliest corporations did. A bunch of other stuff, definitely way less evil than that, but you get kind of the idea. Another, there were expeditions for spices and stuff like that. Well, let's say, I know how to sail the ship. I don't have money to purchase the ship, and in addition to that, my venture is really risky. If I alone put funding into my venture, I alone, one, I could die, right? But then two, and people did die in droves because these were risky ventures. Then two, basically, you could get wrecked. And so then what you had was people who were kind of for the first time, they're mutually investing together in common enterprises. And whether or not those serve the public good all the time, no, I'm not going to claim that, because really,
you mentioned a lot of different subjects here that I want to touch on. There's about 5 things that I want to talk about in your.
Okay, please. Why don't you take a turn, sir?
So the battle for the structure of Cosmos governance as a monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. You were saying that some people would like these systems to function monarchical, and that's kind of a question of efficiency versus effectuality or effectiveness.
Well, Ethereum is a monarchy, and Cosmos is a classical corporation, because in those early joint stock companies, people would pool capital together and take risk together to fund a dangerous expedition. And at the end, that joint stock company would pay dividends. So I'm going to agree that we're not.
It would be an aristocracy. Right? An aristocracy is a combination of noblemen or noble people that come together with large amounts of money and invest in the future. And the idea of a monarchy
Well, in the past, that was only the nobles who could do that. In fact, this is one of the things that makes Cosmos so damn interesting.
Right. So then,
you don't need nobility or a title.
You spoke also about money and the level of influence, and how the more money you have, the higher level of influence this is. That's classical democracy, where your power is proportional.
Well, so interestingly, I want to decouple strongly. What I'm saying is that the layer 1 tokens they're not money. They can be acquired with money. They're valuable. The closest analogy is to funding and running a classical corporation. But by the way, we're not either.
Right. I do agree that the closest analogy is to shareholder value theory, and how shareholders hold the power over the board, and the board thus holds the power of the executives, and so on. And that is a top-down tyrannical system.
Better than that. We're much
Go ahead.
better than that. Have you ever done corporate governance?
Have I? Sorry.
Well, you see, corporate governance, okay, it does work that way, right? You vote with shares, but guess what? Guess what? Shares have classes. Oh, you're retail? Class.
Right.
You can't vote. Okay, you've lost your ability to influence the enterprise. Now, Cosmos, layer one tokens, classes. No, everybody's literally the same. Now I'll let you continue.
So, well, then I'm going to push back on this class system that everyone does have equal opportunity to vote in Cosmos. If
Well,
they
no, that's right. But in a startup, in a corporation, okay, shares have classes, and
right,
retail doesn't get to vote.
this is true. I agree with you. Then, but I think focusing back on Cosmos, the idea that you're touching on is, or I guess the question I have is then if we are likened to a corporate system of governance, what ways can we better that system for blockchains? Because as we said, blockchains have inherent differences versus those of corporations, namely that they have smart contracts and validators that enforce rules that everyone has to agree on, and these are very clearly laid out.
Well, my opinion is that we continue to experiment. That's why when I mentioned those people who wanted to apply like one individual, one vote models to Cosmos, that they're probably okay. I don't know, and there may be places that stuff fits in, but areas. So first of all, we have to realize that governance writ large, right? There's going to be a problem most likely to never go away. It'll always be very challenging.
Right.
And so, all right, where do we kind of go from that statement? Mm-hmm.
I think just to push this in real quick, the monarchy, aristocratic elements and democratic elements people are trying to enforce in Cosmos, people see as, funny enough, people see as either or, really when it can be and I think we should pivot after I allow you to finish here, to what a republic is and how the United States system incorporates monarchical, aristocratical, and democratical elements into it. So continue, please.
Right. Well, what I would say is that what's interesting, man? I'll throw this out there. Okay. Recently, you probably heard me give a certain closed source contract based decentralized exchange a whole lot of guff. And you know what? I think I was right to do so because it's a public product, okay, that people are coming onto, and their validators, they're voting on, whether to initialize closed source contracts without knowing what's in the contract. And I think that's, I believe that's insane.
It's like voting for a measure that you have no idea what's in it. Why would you do that?
Well, they're doing that, and it's a lot of validators all throughout Cosmos. I think it's, well, personally, I believe that it puts the validators at great jeopardy. Okay, but let's like kind of go a little further with this, right? So, very interestingly, I'm a really big believer in private property. I really believe that not all code needs to be open source, and I'm really a believer in, free organization of private whatevers, right? And I think that one of the most interesting chains that hasn't launched yet, but likely will, It is probably going to be a chain whose source code is closed except to its user community, because kind of like what I'll just say, what Kujira is doing a little screwed up, because even their users don't know what their contracts do. Their validators are voting on what those contracts should do, and they don't have any clue if they actually do that or not. However, imagine a chain whose code is only open to the users of that chain. They understand net code base. I just want to say that I think that is actually completely ethical and fine. In Cosmos, I suspect that is going to first hit the ground as, okay, when you look at a VC fund, like what is it, right? Well, one of the things that it is, interestingly, is an intelligence network. They call it deal flow, okay? But really what deal flow is, you have people coming to you with ideas because you have capital, and also you're aggregating ideas and you're talking to all these people. Probably most of the ideas are crap. Some of them are amazing. And so you're also community building. Basically, to kind of circle my point back, I imagine that in the next 2 years, we see a Cosmos chain that is effectively a fund. And what?
Then how do we do this? I think this is an important question to ask, especially over the interchain, that these Cosmos chains don't exist in isolation, and most chains don't exist in isolation anymore. How do we enforce transactions over of private property over the interchain? Let's say there's a dispute that I send token X over channel A and something happens to it. Whose property is it? Whose fault and liability is it? How do we solve that problem? And who comes to consensus on it? I mean,
Okay, so really cool question. I'm going to say that when it goes between chains, it is a simple answer of we should not. Okay, all matters. And notice sovereignty. Okay, take sovereignty really seriously when you mentally model this stuff. Okay, so what we're claiming is that these chains are sovereign. One of the things that means is that, like, they own their faults. Okay, so when osmosis was exploited, ultimately, whose fault was it? Well, okay, I'm an osmosis validator. I would say that my blame in that is proportional to my osmosis vote power, if that makes sense.
okay.
And yeah, sure, like it was our team. Well, it wasn't only our team, but we were one of the teams that assisted in halting the chain, which is super cool. And that is, validators very vigorously doing their job. It give you a little context. It took 13 minutes from first exploit to chain halt, which pretty amazing to me, man. And I got up probably 12 hours after the chain halt. Okay, I noticed what's going on? There's no blocks. What happened? Call my team in a panic, right? Like, what happened? They're like, well, there was a thing, and then I learned the entire story, and I was fascinated that one, our organization, but then additionally, okay, at the time we were probably less than 1% of vote power. To halt the chain required another, 32.33% of osmosis vote power to come together and choose to stop $1 billion collective thing. Just pull the plug on it. Shit, something's wrong, right? And they did that in 13.
Well, what happens if the validators do not do that?
I'll tell you. You want to know?
Yeah.
That literally killed osmosis. Dead. Everything would have been drained. It was a very
Right.
serious bug.
So how do we enforce or not even
Oh, oh
enforce?
no.
How do we
Oh no. That's the thing, man. Like, everybody's equal. The source code is open. Everything is transparent. Every risk is disclosed to every participant, and that's it.
okay, then the subsequent question to that is how do our governance systems uplift sovereignty and upkeep infrastructure?
Well,
Because
okay.
if we don't upkeep it,
We're
it's
good at
bound to
the
degrade.
first. We're good at the first, and we're bad at the second. Okay. Sovereignty, dude. Like, if you ever want to launch a chain, whether for fun or for profit, and to be honest with you, for these days, I'd prefer to do it for fun. But like, what I'm saying is, I'm very happy to launch a chain with you. We can begin with like a really really basic one. It's doable in a day. Okay, so like you're going from nothing to chain with tokens on osmosis in a day, less maybe. Um, and the reason I'm mentioning this, okay, is that I was also describing like that new class of chains where I figure they may function as a fund. They might not even be open source. And by the way, I don't care provided it's not putting people at risk, right? And anyhow, so we're really good at sovereignty because you and me, and let's say we add another 8 people in, okay, using Raspberry Pis, nothing else, we can launch a blockchain in a day. It'll cover the face of the planet, okay, and we control it, and that's sovereignty. Now, what's the root of value? Well, I believe it's consensus. I believe it's the fact that between the 10 of us, we're able to derive truth according to rules. Better than a country.
Yeah, and I think that's what's most amazing about it. Uh, that was perfectly well said. You said we control the blockchain, and I wanna sparse that apart a little bit. By that, do you mean that the majority should govern the sovereignty?
Well, what I mean is that that suppose that we get 8 other people, okay, and all 10 of us have a Raspberry Pi, and we take the token supply, which must be a minimum of, I think, 100 million. There are arcane reasons behind this. I'd love to fix it. I consider it a bug. Anyhow, each of us 10 million, okay? 10 million of these layer one tokens, okay? And so, look, we're equal participants who, if we wish to, can unbond and leave the network. We can cease to validate, but together we create this truth machine. What I mean by truth machine is that, again, I believe when we do law in the human context, I'm going to go on a limb and say it never works. We always notice I'm using never and always, which means probably there are edge cases where I'm somehow wrong. Okay, but please take this to its extremes. That it never works, and we always cause unintended effect. But our chain that we started for one day's work times 10 people times whatever the hell crazy amount of work it took to build the SDK and Tendermint and all the other stuff, which, by the way, like, yeah, fund core developers and look for validators who do core development work because, like, it was a vast quantity of work. But the point is, all of that is now available for free, and you can rapidly put together a sovereign blockchain that spans the whole planet, and between us, like between those 10 people, we can know that the rules that we create are actually followed.
And that's the most amazing part of what you and many other people have put work into the Cosmos SDK and Tendermint and so on. It's my thought that the majority should always govern sovereignty and the law of the chain. What?
Well, if we go with if we go with the default settings, then 66 two-thirds,
Yes.
right, will make any decision. By the way, those are parameters. We can change the way that governance works. And I don't care if it's maturity or what. The interesting part is we define how it works up until today, up until this minute. Cosmos governance, other than once, like, because there have been crazy ass scandals once funds meet humans, right? But like the machine part of our governance systems has worked perfectly. This doesn't happen.
I think the interesting part here is that we have a 2/3 vote on coming to consensus. Um, and we also allow for a 2/3, while we do allow for a simple majority, that's really a trick in my mind, and I'll explain why. We have to have a 2/3 vote in order to pass major proposals on the Cosmos Hub or anywhere else. The reason I ask the question or say that the majority should govern sovereignty is because today we look at the Cosmos Hub and the power of veto. The 1/3 minority interest controls the other 2/3. It was Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 8 that explained that if you give, if you do not allow a simple majority in the Senate or the House, the minority takes too much precedence in decision making. Now, it's not to say that the majority can't dominate the minority. It does happen, and it is a problem with systems. Um, there's a lesser evil to choose, and I think that's the majority interest. With that said, my one major problem with governance today is that minority veto. And I understand why that exists, but it exists in a system that doesn't function correctly. And here's why I think that.
Actually, hang on. It functions perfectly, though. So you understand that it exists because it's mirroring consensus. And, but do you understand how easy it is? Like here, let's say, fuck the veto, right? Well, uh, you can, and it's not hard, go out, go on the Cosmos Hub, create a governance proposal. It's cheap, too. Other people can place the deposit, and, the title can be fuck the veto, right? You can go through your reasons for that line of logic. By the way, I get where you're coming from. Not certain that it is the correct path, but I get the point of view, and this is also why we're better than governments. We're better than corporations. Okay. The reason is you're just a dude. Say you have one atom. Say you have a tenth of an atom. I think you can do this on a tenth of an atom, man. And that is an unprecedented level of power, regardless of your capital level.
It's not that I don't think, it's not that I think the veto should not exist. It's that I think it should exist in a certain way. That way being not in a democracy. Okay, and so what do I mean by that? What I'd like to have in Cosmos governance is a some form of a house where the power is proportional to your economic stake in the blockchain, and a Senate where the validators are all have one vote
But it's already there.
But the validators don't have. It's not an equal vote across validators. The veto would
Well,
be more fair if it was equal, would it not?
that's very true. That is a very good point. Please continue.
So, like, with all that said, like, why I think we should split it up and give the veto power to, let's say we have 50 validators on our chain, we give them each one vote, then the veto becomes more fair because the minority interest is represented by the number of entities that are a part of the network versus the economic stake in said network. That's my opinion on it.
Yeah, look, like, and okay. See, now we're into the really meaty, interesting shit. Okay, the reason this is the really meaty, interesting shit is because if we experiment in this realm, you were asking how do we improve blockchain governance? The answer, in my opinion, is experimentation. Unlike in the real world, where if we experiment with governance, well, for one thing, people can literally get killed. For another thing, people may have been killed on blockchain governance, but like, let's just say that our violence level is, you know, severely lower than the real world, right? And that maybe the potential for physical violence is far lower. And then you got to keep in mind that my definition of the state is the monopoly on violence. So, another really cynical way to look at this is like, well, the blockchains don't matter until they launch a war. But I want to be hella more optimistic than that.
Yeah,
right?
maybe let's keep that one in the pocket.
Well,
I think it's valuable.
no, it's gonna happen because, well, maybe there's another call, but like it will happen, and mainly because there's no better coordination mechanism for, like, imagine the people at, like, on the short end of a stick in a war, right? Where, like, you basically got nothing and you might have some land. Okay. Well, what do you need to do? Well, you need to amass weapons, capital, food, all the other stuff to secure your precious piece of land, right? And frankly, I do think that, like, blockchains are going to be used in the next decade to raise money for warfare. And keep in mind, I'm like trying not to take a moral stance here. What I'm saying is, like, for better or for worse, it's likely to happen due to the efficiency. That makes sense? Oh, and by the way, those people between each other, they'll be able to know that there are rules. Whereas, like with, who's in a real shit situation right now? Well, I would say Russian conscripts. Right? I hear it's really bad for them as individuals, right? People who are drafted to fight for Russia. And do they have rights? Do rules apply to them? Well, from what I've heard, absolutely not. And can you kind of extrapolate from that? You get what I mean?
Yeah. I think I can understand the rule aspects and how it applies equally, and some of the ways that you would like to improve blockchain governance systems. I guess you could even say corporate governance systems because they are.
I want to go more abstract and merely say governance.
Okay, fair enough.
I would intentionally blur those lines. I remember I just asserted superiority, right? And I really clear about it. We're better than the government. We're better than companies. And so, like, Am I going to be
Well, if we're
surprised
better
when
than companies,
a... Mhm.
if we're better than companies on an individual level, maybe that's true. But on an
Oh no,
interchain level,
our collective is better than
I
company.
would I would disagree with that because we have no rules and regulations to govern the interchain economy.
Well, no, we do. We do.
What are they?
Well, it's called IBC. It's a protocol that allows the chains to collaborate without compromising sovereignty.
But is there a world? It seems like this, and I'll lay out the grounds from my perspective that IBC, the interchain, is a free market economy, and in free market economies with too much sovereignty, um, they devolve into
But
they
everything is
tend
free.
towards network effects, and these network effects create monopolies. And monopolies are efficient in systems, but eventually lead to un.
Monopolies are horrifically inefficient.
Well,
Monopolies actually, you know, clog the market. But check it
right.
out. You only get a monopoly
Hmm.
because of the state. The state creates the monopolies by creating the laws that allow companies to grow to absolutely outrageous scale because those laws stop others from competing with them.
What about network effects, though? Network effects are naturally tend towards monopolies. Even without governance, this would be the case, no?
Well, sure, but those are network effects. We can call those nature as
And
opposed to law.
then is
Well,
then is
what
there
I'm
not?
saying is, you don't get a Walmart without decades of favorable legislation to Walmart. What I'm saying is, you don't get an Amazon without all those DoD contracts. What I'm saying is, you don't get a Google without that InQtel investment. And I don't know if you know what InQtel is. It is the CIA's venture capital fund, and Google was heavily funded by them. Or might be the NSA, or maybe the intelligence community. But my point is, okay, that monopolies, enterprises above a certain scale, those are created. Those are not natural things.
Do you believe that markets effectively distribute capital better than the government?
Oh yeah, yeah, strongly, strongly.
Is there not a crossbreed between government and markets where we're kind of sitting at two end polarities
Well,
there?
it's called
You either have a large amount of regulations that then cede to corporate regulatory capture, or you have a lacks of regulations which cedes towards, like we said, network effects. And
I believe that every network, sorry, that look, again, the network effects are nature, and that every regulation, every business regulation, please take me liberally, is designed to favor one group or another, and is therefore unfair.
so then, can a protocol be biased and unfair, like IBC?
Oh yes, and then like, well, no, IBC. You see, IBC doesn't do a help. And that's why it can't be biased and unfair. Okay, IBC, what it does. By the way, I'll have to run in about, let's say, 10 minutes. Okay, I
Yeah, no
start
worries.
walking.
I don't mean to take you over this
But
time.
no, I'm gonna
I'm
walk
just
you
enjoying
through
the conversation.
why. Oh no, I'm enjoying the hell out of it too. I'm gonna take my parents to the airport in a few hours. So IBC. Why is you're like, is the IBC protocol corrupt? Well, sir, no. The reason is that the IBC protocol is highly, highly mechanical. And thus far, with maybe the exception of like Dragonberry or, some other findings, but like basically, man, the loss rate on IBC, it is literally trending towards zero. I know, because like those are systems that I maintain, and I actively work on forcing it to trend towards zero. Okay. And so what do I mean by forcing it to trend towards zero? Well, sometimes an IBC packet will get stuck, but let us, for just a moment, discuss the IBC packet life cycle of the transfer module. Okay? And I think in a minute you'll understand why I don't believe that like, you know, can a protocol be corrupt or what have you. No, certainly IBC is not, because all IBC does is you as a user create a transaction on chain A. You say, hi, I want to send some tokens to chain B. Now your transaction never touches chain B, okay? It's only on chain A. A relayer comes along and says, hey, I want to relay this packet to chain B. So it does that. And when you make the transaction on chain A, your tokens are placed in an escrow account. Okay. And so send over to chain B. Chain B sends an acknowledgement to chain A. Chain A sends an acknowledgement to chain B. Finally, chain B sends the ACK, okay, the acknowledgement of the acknowledgement of the acknowledgement. And that final ACK clears your transaction from we call historical state. The ledger is kind of broken into two pieces, right? So you have state, which is everything that must be permanent and available for a node to be a valid instance of the chain and make the next block, okay? And you have historical state, and this is the difference between like a pruned node and an archive node. The archive node has all historical state. And when that ACK gets back to chain A, if it is a pruned node, the IBC transaction is then removed from chain A's historical state. And here's the thing, dude. That is all the IBC transfer does. It does nothing else. So
it's very fickle.
Well, not fickle. It's simple. It is so little that I would argue to you strongly that it's not a corruptible thing. It has an extremely clear, precise function, and you know, at least the token transfer piece of it, it does nothing else. We could get into interchain accounts, and they're like, I don't know, maybe like one day Strider or Quicksilver could like corrupt the hub. It's possible. I
don't know if we have enough time to get into interchain accounts, but I would love to talk about it with you sometime. With that said, we're kind of.
I'd love to have another call, because look, this is stuff that can I say? This is what drew me into Cosmos, right? And if you had a good time, well, I certainly had a good time.
Yeah, I had a great time. I think, like you were speaking about more mechanical systems, and that's very important. And that was kind of like a thread that we pulled through the whole conversation today. I know you got to leave, but I wanted to leave off with this just last question of why do you care about blockchain in general?
Oh, well, I think that governments are very fundamentally broken. Governments are the arbiter of the corporate form, and I wanted something better, and that's Cosmos. But we have to actually go backwards a bit to really get at why I care about blockchain in general, which is, of course, I also believe that money is broken. And I told you several times in this call, I don't think that, Cosmos Layer 1 governance tokens are money. And take that to the bank, take that to the brain, because they're not, okay? Bitcoin is money. And keep in mind that the dollar is also money, right? But like money has degrees. You get what I mean, right? Some monies are better than other monies. And, corporate equity is sort of money in the sense that the layer 1 governance tokens are sort of money. But, well, this gets into age differences a little bit. Graduated from college around, I believe it was January of 06, and shortly thereafter, we had that crazy 2008 financial crisis, which was really quite impactful. There, it was nuts, and I believe that stuff is actually continuing to occur. Also, will continue to occur regularly until we deal with the way that money is issued. And don't get me as too maxy, because I'm always looking for, that thing that could actually end up being better than Bitcoin, right? And I believe that it'll come, okay? I don't know what it'll be, and it might take 50 years, it might take 100 years, okay? But Bitcoin is, as of right now, as we speak, it is the world's best, least corrupt money. And, well, when you combine fixing, like, the negative effects of the state on let's say, well, the monetary system at large is, that early United States that we were discussing before, it didn't have a Federal Reserve, and it also didn't have a monopoly on the concept of money. Okay, that didn't exist. And, you know the notion of free coinage?
No, I don't.
Free coinage, thank you, sir, is the idea that, like, basically any private individual or entity ought to be allowed to issue their own currency, right? That is free coinage. And then those coins compete. Thank you, sir. I fundamentally believe in that. Because you were talking earlier about monopolies. And if I had to guess, you and I are of different minds on what causes monopolies. I believe monopolies are only caused by the state. Only. I'll repeat myself, only caused by the state. You can have, like, in an individual market, you can dominate it by being really, really good, right? But when we talk about genuine monopolies and also, let's say, scaling businesses toward the $1 trillion range, well, I believe that only happens because of the state. I don't think there are other reasons for it. And free coinage applies that line of thinking to money, okay? And maybe a parting thought as I re-enter the building here. So just as I believe firmly that society benefits when, you know, three participants are competing against one another to deliver something superior, I think that money works that way as well. In fact, if you want to know how fucked money is currently, you'll notice that the US dollar relative to other currencies is doing really well. But, I don't personally think the US dollar is a great store of value due to inflation. It can be arbitrarily printed. Okay? They don't have to ask your permission. They can just do it. And they do. And, who are the losers? That's everybody else. That's me, that's you, that's
I think
my
that's a great
thing.
place to leave it off. I want to respect your time. And hopefully hopefully in the future and what is happening now, blockchain will be able to turn those losers into winners and empower the many versus the singular government entity that you speak of that creates monopolies. um,
Well, it's not a singular government. It's the
oh,
monopoly on violence. But I shall let you go. And dude, thank you so much for this
yeah, I
conversation.
mean, Jacob, thank you for
You
coming
captured
out.
so many of my passions today. And I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
I really enjoyed our conversation, and I always love learning from people that are more knowledgeable than I am, and have a lot more experience, and so I appreciate the coming on today. And I have a lot more questions, but I know you don't have enough time. I hope we can speak again sometime soon.
I mean, why don't we do it monthly? Right?
Let's do
And
it.
just, okay, cool, man. I'm
All
done.
right. Well, you have a great day. Drive safe. Drive your parents to the airport safe, and glad you're over COVID. Talk to you
Hey,
later.
thanks, man. I'll see you later.